In the quiet of Graceland's kitchen on a chilly December morning in 1967, Elvis Presley's life was about to be changed forever. A single, life-altering statement from his wife Priscilla would shift his entire world, and not just his world as the king of rock and roll. The moment she told him she was pregnant, silence fell between them, a silence so heavy that it felt like an eternity. For Elvis, this was not just news of an expanding family. It was a powerful moment that would force him to confront everything he thought he knew about himself. What did Elvis feel in that quiet, piercing moment? Was he ready to be a father, or was he paralyzed by the weight of responsibility, by the uncertainty of his own abilities? What followed was a powerful transformation that no one, not even his wife, could have anticipated. This was the moment when Elvis Presley, the superstar who had conquered the world with his music, became a man in the truest sense of the word. A man who would prioritize family over fame, who would redefine what it meant to be a father. In this moment, Elvis would not just be responding to the announcement of a child, he would be discovering what it truly meant to love unconditionally. In a world that constantly demanded his attention, where fame was both a blessing and a curse, Elvis was about to make a decision that would echo through the rest of his life. As we step into this story, think about your own life. When have you faced a moment that forced you to reconsider your priorities? For Elvis, it was about to become the most defining moment of his life, and we are about to dive into the depths of how it reshaped his world. Elvis Presley had everything a man could wish for. He was the king legendary adored, the man whose voice captivated millions, and whose moves became the pulse of an entire generation. His music, his charisma, his very presence demanded attention wherever he went. But behind the glitz and the glamour, there was a man who felt the weight of that fame in ways most could never imagine. At the height of his career, Elvis was trapped in a life of contradictions. On stage, he was untouchable, an icon who could do no wrong. But off stage, the lines blurred. He was a man who struggled to find peace in the chaos of his own success. Fame was a double-edged sword. He had the world at his feet, yet he was constantly on the move, bound by his career, unable to find respite or solace in the everyday things that most people took for granted. He was no stranger to loneliness. Despite being surrounded by countless fans and surrounded by friends, the man they adored felt isolated, misunderstood. His relationship with Priscilla, though built on love, was strained by the pressures of his public life. She was young, isolated at Graceland, and lonely in a life that appeared glamorous but was marked by solitude and uncertainty. Elvis, too, carried a burden of his own, the creative frustration of being locked in a cycle of films and albums that felt more like a factory than an artistic journey. They were both living in a goldfish bowl, a marriage surrounded by constant press and the overwhelming glare of fame. The intimacy that once defined their relationship was slipping away under the weight of it all. Yet, there was still love, and that love was what Elvis turned to when the silence of the kitchen weighed on him after Priscilla's revelation. What would this revelation mean for them? What would it mean for Elvis, whose life had always been about the performance, the next show, the next record, the next hit? Would this announcement be the one thing that could make him pause, make him stop and take stock of who he was, not just as an entertainer, but as a man? As Priscilla stood there watching him, Elvis could feel the walls of his carefully constructed world begin to tremble. Could he, the king, truly embrace the role of father? Could he step away from the spotlight long enough to nurture this tiny life that now depended on him? For the first time in years, Elvis was faced with a question that no amount of fame or fortune could answer for him. What kind of man do I want to be? The silence stretched on, thick and heavy, as Elvis wrestled with the enormity of it all. It wasn't just the news of a child. It was the realization that he was no longer just living for himself. There was a life coming into this world that would depend on him. This tiny being would look to him for love, protection, and guidance. For the first time in his life, Elvis understood what it meant to be responsible, not for a stage or for a record or even for his legacy, but for a life that would carry his name. This was the beginning of his true transformation, though neither he nor Priscilla knew it yet. The days that followed Priscilla's revelation were filled with an undercurrent of tension. Every glance between Elvis and Priscilla seemed to carry unspoken questions. As they moved through the ordinary moments of life at Graceland, meals together, quiet evenings by the fire, there was a sense of something monumental hanging in the air, unacknowledged but ever present. Elvis, who had always been in control of every situation, now found himself adrift in a sea of uncertainty. The world outside never paused for the private battles waging within him. The constant demands of his career, the pressures from Colonel Parker to keep working, to keep touring, to keep being Elvis Presley, were at odds with the growing need inside him for something more than fame. He had always been able to compartmentalize his life, separating the public from the private, the entertainer from the man. But now, with Priscilla's words echoing in his mind, he couldn't do it anymore. Priscilla had kept the secret for 3 long days, watching Elvis in the silence that followed the announcement. Each moment of that silence felt like a weight pressing down on her heart. Was he scared, angry? Was he thrilled at the thought of becoming a father? Or was he afraid of what it might mean for their already strained relationship? One night, as they sat together, the tension was unbearable. Elvis tried to distract himself, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this moment, this realization, was bigger than anything he had faced before. As the sound of the television buzzed in the background, he turned to Priscilla, his eyes searching hers for answers that neither of them could fully understand yet. "Baby, you seem a million miles away lately," Elvis said softly, the concern in his voice more genuine than it had been in weeks. Priscilla smiled weakly, masking her fear. "Everything's fine," she replied, but even she knew it wasn't the truth. It was in this moment, in the quiet of their shared space, that the emotional distance between them began to shrink, not through words, but through something deeper. Elvis was beginning to understand the gravity of what was at stake, but he wasn't ready to face it fully. Not yet. That night, after Priscilla confided in her friend Sandy about the turmoil she was feeling, Sandy offered a gentle but firm piece of advice. "There's never a perfect time for news like this," Sandy said, taking Priscilla's hands in hers. "But Elvis loves you. Whatever his reaction, it'll come from that love." Priscilla knew that this was true. She knew that Elvis had always been loving, but love alone didn't always guarantee that he was ready for this responsibility. Could he, the king, truly let go of his fame and embrace the role of father? Would he even want to? The tension grew with each passing day. As the weight of the secret became almost too much to bear, Elvis remained distant, not because he didn't care, but because he didn't yet understand what this news meant for him, what it meant for the future of his family. On the morning of December 17th, 1967, Elvis sat at the kitchen table, reading the newspaper, as he always did. The sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow over the room, but the warmth seemed to only highlight the coldness of the silence between them. Priscilla had rehearsed her words countless times, but nothing seemed right. Should she say it quickly? Should she make it special? Or should she just be direct? Something inside her told her that the ordinary moments were just as important as the extraordinary ones. This wasn't a time for grand gestures. It was a time for honesty, for sharing something real between them. "Elvis," she said, her voice steady but her heart pounding. "I am pregnant." For a moment there was nothing but stillness. Elvis didn't speak. He didn't move. He just stared at her, his face unreadable, the newspaper frozen in his hands. The seconds ticked by slowly, almost painfully. Priscilla watched him, her mind racing with fear and doubt. What did his silence mean? Was it a disappointment? Shock? The silence stretched on, and Elvis remained motionless. But inside, his thoughts were already shifting. He was beginning to see not just the reality of becoming a father, but the profound responsibility that came with it. In that brief, excruciating silence, Elvis was beginning to understand just how much his life was about to change. The silence that hung between them in the kitchen on that cold December morning was not the void that Priscilla feared. It was the sound of a man's entire identity reshaping itself in an instant. In those long moments as the clock ticked on, Elvis was grappling with something much deeper than a simple reaction to the news. He was confronting his own soul, his fears, his hopes, his legacy. And in that silence, everything he thought he knew about himself began to unravel. In the past, Elvis had always been driven by the demands of fame. He had lived a life defined by tours, albums, and public appearances. His entire identity had been wrapped up in being Elvis Presley, the king, the man who could do no wrong in the eyes of millions. But now, in the presence of this revelation, everything was about to shift. Priscilla watched him, her breath caught in her throat, as each second passed with no answer, no words. Her mind raced. Could this be the moment that shattered their marriage? Could he really take on the responsibility of being a father, after all the chaos and instability that had defined their lives together? But what Priscilla didn't know, what neither of them could yet see, was that Elvis was already answering that unspoken question. His silence wasn't one of anger or fear. It was the space where a profound realization was forming. It was the sound of a man coming face to face with the reality of his own vulnerability. When Elvis finally spoke, his voice was different from the confident tones he was used to projecting. It was soft, filled with uncertainty, but also something else, something deeper. He looked at Priscilla, his eyes filled with an emotion that neither of them could have anticipated. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice low and searching, like a man trying to understand something far larger than himself. Priscilla nodded, her heart in her throat. Dr. Thompson confirmed it yesterday. Elvis sat the newspaper down, his hands shaking slightly as he stood up. He walked around the table and knelt beside Priscilla's chair, taking her hands in his. The act itself was a shift, a move from distance to closeness, from the king of rock and roll to something far more human. "Priscilla," he said, his voice cracking with raw emotion, "I need you to know something. I've been Elvis Presley for the world for 12 years now, but I want to be the best father in the world for our child." His words carried a weight that surprised them both, a weight that was not just about being a father, but about becoming someone different, someone better. In that moment, Elvis understood that the role of father wasn't just a title, it was an identity he was ready to embrace, fully and completely. He had spent so long chasing fame, but now he was choosing something infinitely more meaningful. "From this moment on, everything I do, every decision I make is going to be about what's best for our family," Elvis continued, his voice filled with determination. "Not for my career, not for the Colonel, not for anyone else. Our baby is going to have a daddy who's present, who's involved, and who loves them more than life itself." The words were more than a promise. They were a declaration of a new man, a man who understood that true greatness wasn't about the spotlight. It wasn't about records or fans or adoration. True greatness was about love. True greatness was about being present for the people who mattered most. And Elvis was making that commitment in a way he never had before. And then, unexpectedly, Elvis began to cry. It wasn't the kind of cry one might expect from a man of his stature, the kind of cry filled with sadness or fear. No, these were tears of overwhelming joy, of realizing the enormity of what was coming, and the responsibility he was ready to embrace. It was a tearful surrender to a future that he now saw as his truest purpose. Priscilla pulled him into her arms, her heart swelling with a mixture of love and disbelief. For the first time in what felt like years, their relationship felt real again. Not the kind of relationship defined by fame or appearances, but a relationship built on shared purpose and mutual love. "We're still going to have a baby," Elvis whispered, as if speaking the words aloud made them more real. "Are you happy?" "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm going to be a daddy." In that moment, everything changed. The man who had once seemed too distant, too consumed by his career, was now fully present, not just for Priscilla, but for their child, for the family they were about to create together. In the days and weeks following that transformative moment, Elvis Presley began to walk a new path, a path that would lead him not just to fatherhood, but to a deeper understanding of what it meant to truly live for something beyond himself. The man who had spent years singing about love, longing, and heartache now found himself living those very emotions, but in a way that was far more profound and lasting. Elvis's transformation didn't just end with his decision to become a more present father. It radiated outward, affecting every part of his life. The very next day after his revelation, he made a choice that surprised even his most loyal confidants. He drastically reduced his touring schedule. This was a bold move, one that went against the very fabric of his career, but for Elvis it was a necessary one. He made it clear to his manager, Colonel Parker, that family came first, even if it meant sacrificing the tour dates that would have raked in millions. Tom, Elvis said, using the Colonel Sepp's real name instead of his professional title. There are some things more important than my career. This is one of them. It was a turning point that sent shockwaves through his professional team. For someone who had built his entire legacy around being the world's most famous entertainer, to place family above his career was unheard of. But Elvis didn't care about the consequences. He cared about being there for Priscilla, about being there for their baby. This was no longer just about him. This was about creating a life that would be grounded in love, presence, and commitment. At Graceland, things began to change in other ways too. Elvis made sure that the master bedroom was relocated to the ground floor so that Priscilla wouldn't have to navigate the stairs during her pregnancy. He hired additional security to ensure that their private life would remain just that, private. But perhaps the most touching change of all was how Elvis immersed himself in the idea of becoming a father. He devoured books on pregnancy, childbirth, and parenting with the same intensity he had once reserved for learning new songs. Late at night, Priscilla would find him bent over a baby book, taking notes, preparing for the arrival of their child. It was a side of Elvis few ever saw, the side of a man who was gentle, thoughtful, and deeply invested in the future he was about to help create. As Priscilla's pregnancy progressed, Elvis became increasingly protective of her, and their bond deepened. He would often talk to the baby, singing soft lullabies and telling stories about the future. He converted one of the guest rooms into a nursery, hand-picking every detail from the crib to the mobile that hung above it. "I want our baby to feel loved from the moment they take their first breath," he told Priscilla as they painted the nursery together, each brushstroke a symbol of the new life they were building together. The arguments that had plagued their marriage seemed to dissolve as they worked together toward this new shared mission. And when disagreements did arise, Elvis would gently place his hand on Priscilla's growing belly and say, "Let's not upset the baby." It was their code, a reminder of what really mattered: love, family, and the future they were creating. When Lisa Marie Presley was born on February 1st, 1968, Elvis's transformation was complete. The man who had once felt overwhelmed by the responsibility of marriage now embraced fatherhood with a devotion that shocked everyone who knew him. He insisted on being present for the birth, which was a rarity in those days for fathers. When he first held his daughter, the joy on his face was indescribable. It was a moment of peace and contentment that had eluded him for so long. "This is your home, baby girl," Elvis whispered to Lisa Marie as he walked her through Graceland, introducing her to every room. "Every room in this house is filled with love for you." From that moment on, Elvis's life was no longer defined by the stage, the spotlight, or the endless demands of his career. It was defined by his love for his family. He turned down lucrative touring opportunities to stay home for Lisa Marie's first steps, first words, and first birthday. He spent hours playing with her, singing her to sleep, and teaching her songs. Elvis had become the man he had always been capable of becoming: a devoted husband, father, and partner. His transformation wasn't just about his own personal growth. It was about the impact he had on those around him. He had become a symbol of the power of love to change lives, to heal wounds, and to build a future that was more meaningful than any concert or record could ever provide. Elvis Presley's transformation from the king of rock and roll to a devoted father and husband didn't happen overnight. It was the result of a pivotal moment, one that forced him to look beyond the stage lights and confront his deepest fears, desires, and responsibilities. The man who had always been driven by the adoration of millions now found himself driven by something far more powerful: love. In that quiet moment in the kitchen, when Elvis sat in silence after hearing Priscilla's news, the weight of fatherhood suddenly dawned on him. It was not a burden, but a gift, one that would forever change the way he saw himself and the world around him. The man who had once been consumed by his fame and career was now fully present, aware of the impact his decisions would have on his family and their future. Through his journey, Elvis learned a profound lesson that true greatness is not measured by the applause of the crowd or the number of records sold. It's measured by the love we give, the connections we make, and the way we choose to be there for the people who matter most. For Elvis, that was the greatest performance of his life, not on stage but in the quiet, intimate moments where love and commitment defined his every action. Elvis's story reminds us all that the most important performances in life happen off stage. They happen in the kitchen, in the bedroom, in the quiet moments where we choose to be present, where we choose love over everything else that the world tells us matters. It is in these moments that we truly become the people we are meant to be. As you reflect on this story, ask yourself, what moments in your own life have reshaped who you are? How have your relationships, your family, your friends changed you? Elvis's journey teaches us that love and responsibility can transform us in ways we never imagined, but only if we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, to face the things that scare us, and to choose the people we love above all else. Let us know in the comments, how has love transformed you? What was the moment in your life when you truly understood the power of love and responsibility? Share your thoughts, and remember to subscribe for more incredible stories that remind us of the transformative power of human connection.